Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. She was hired to nurse them back to health. Instead, she took their lives. For months, the DaVita Dialysis Center in Lufkin, Texas, had been baffled by the rising number of deaths and injuries occurring in their clinic. In April alone, they'd rushed 34 patients to the hospital. But no one expected such a horrific cause to be behind it all. Kimberly Clark Saenz was a well-liked licensed vocational nurse at the center. The East Texas nurse was a mother of two and known for her smiles and the stories she told to help patients pass the time. But on April 28, 2008, witnesses came forward to say that instead of life-saving medication, they'd seen Saenz adding toxic bleach to IV ports. Turns out it wasn't the first time. Once caught, the shocking story of Saenz' murderous practices began to unravel. The book that we're featuring this evening is Killer Nurse, with my special guest, journalist and author, John Foxjohn. Welcome to the program, and thank you for agreeing to this interview, John Foxjohn.
Thanks for having me, Dan. I appreciate you asking me.
Thank you very much. Incredible story, a real wild ride. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
Now, you are a former, I found that very interesting, you're a former Vietnam vet, airborne ranger, and retired teacher. But I think the most interesting aspect, maybe you can tell us, you're a former detective. Tell us what type of detective you were, and tell us just a little bit about about your past. Would probably be very important to this story.
Yeah, I was in law enforcement for 10 years. I was a patrolman for a while. Then the last 4 years I was a homicide detective, and I've actually investigated over 300 homicides.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite the career in 4 years. That's pretty condensed.
Yeah. I never knew what I wanted to do when I grew up, so I just kept doing other things.
That's great. Great way to approach things. Now, without giving anything away, why did you choose this particular case, this particular story, to write Killer Nurse? Tell us why.
Okay. As you know, I write fiction too. I write crime fiction, and actually, a lot of my fiction has done really well. I have 3 bestsellers, but when this came along, there was a case right a couple of years before this one. It was a cold case murder trial, and I sat through the court proceedings and everything, thinking about writing a true crime on it. I did all the paperwork and everything, all the trial, but in the end, I just didn't think the case was, I guess, I don't want to say glorious enough, but I just didn't think anybody would really want to read about it.
Right.
And the place where I live here is real small, and opportunities don't come around very often. And when this hit the news, I recognized right off, because I had been a homicide detective, I recognized how unique this was. This is the most, and I say this, but it's true, it's the most unique crime in history. Nobody has ever been accused, charged, and convicted of murdering people using bleach. Okay. And I sat back and I looked at the news and everything, and I got some of the information, but it was very sketchy at the time when it first broke. And I looked and I said, this is not something I would want to investigate.
Right.
I recognized right off how tough this was going to be. But if they were able to, and I knew this first broke as aggravated assaults, not murders. It didn't turn to murders later on, as far as the public knew. I have friends on the Lufkin Police Department, though, and I knew this was going to turn into a murder investigation.
I see. So yeah.
And I knew right then that this was something that I had to write, just because of the uniqueness of it. But it's right here in my backyard.
Right. Exactly.
And
yeah. Right.
of course, I didn't know anything about writing true crime either, but that didn't stop me.
No. Well, you had the discipline of being a writer anyway, and a successful writer, and so you already had that. So that's a little bit more than some people have anyway, so you're certainly not a novice. Now, let's get to this story here. Before we talk about Lufkin, and you can describe this sort of somewhat small-town place and the corporation, the DaVita Corporation, and this dialysis center, and what goes on at this dialysis center. Before we get to that, let's go back and talk about Kimberly Clark Saenz, who she was born as, and in what circumstances she grew up, what was the background, as much as could possibly have been found. Paint a portrait of the early life, the conditions under which Kimberly Clark grew up, so we can see if there is any semblance of sense of the story and the inevitable outcome. But tell us a little bit about the very beginnings of Kimberly Clark Saenz.
Okay. First, to do that, I need to tell you where she's from, because that really has a lot of bearing on what we know about Kimberly Clark Saenz. She was born and raised in an unincorporated community called Pollock, outside of Lufkin. Real small place, a really closed place. And not only a closed place, but she comes from a family who is really closed up.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, nobody knows a lot about them. They keep to themselves. Their life really revolves around a church there in Pollock. And the church people and everything, they're kind of closed up. And nobody, to be honest with you, before this broke in the news, very few people knew who Kimberly Clark Saenz was. Matter of fact, very few people still know. They know the name. But very few people know who she is, except for family. And a lot of them don't talk, will not talk. So it was really difficult finding a lot of information on. I'm getting into it. She was raised there. She went to school in Pollock, a school district called Central. She had an older brother who was 3 years older than her. Her mother works for Walmart, and her father works for a trucking company. And they're not poor. I would call them probably middle class or lower middle class. They live on land that their parents had, and they just handed down land. She went to school to the 11th grade in Central, which is in Pollock. Then she got pregnant and quit school and had a baby and got married. And she was married, I think, 3 years, got her divorce, and went to work for a trucking company in Lufkin. And so far, up to that point in her life, you can't find anything bad. Not a single thing, except getting pregnant and dropping out of high school, which in this day and time is not considered bad. She met a guy by the name of Kevin Saenz at the trucking company, and she got pregnant again, and they got married. And from that point on, and I think I even said something about it in the book, it was almost like her life was in a vortex. Somebody was flushing the toilet, and down it went. And she was in an accident. I guess about 3 or 4 years before all this really started. And it was a serious accident, and she became addicted to pain medication.
What kind of accident? A car accident?
Yes. And
how serious was the accident?
It was pretty serious, but she wasn't debilitated or anything. But she was okay physically, except for the pain medication. And
okay.
That is probably where her biggest downfall started.
Okay. What I was going to ask is, because the church is very important, and the support of the church, and really, if you really get a window of the friends that they have made in this Pollock, is these people from this church. Now, what kind of church is this? Is it evangelical? What type of religion is practiced there? What is the church there? What is it?
I am not sure. I think it's one of the off branches of Pentecostal.
Okay. Would you consider that this is a very fervent church as opposed to, may say, more very fervent?
Very, yes.
Okay. And okay. So a deeply religious family, notwithstanding, would seem.
Deeply religious, yes.
Okay. And conservative. Okay.
Yes.
Now tell us before we. Well, continue with Kimberly. You say that she becomes addicted to painkillers. Tell us now about this DaVita Dialysis Center. And DaVita is a corporation, so tell us a little bit about that corporation. We're talking about a small, business or a big business, because that plays into this a little bit too.
Yeah, DaVita is a Fortune 500 company. They have something like 1,300 dialysis centers across the country. And they're humongous, and they have a huge revenue.
Right. Now, at what age? Obviously, Kimberly, you say went to grade 11. How does she come to be employed at this dialysis center? What is the sort of screening process for letting people in? And before we go any further, because we're kind of just jumping ahead, did she have any kind of odd behavior reported then, or if somebody in retrospect, or was there any visits with a psychologist, a psychiatrist? Was there anything of note like that at all that you could find?
Yeah, there was a few things. I need to talk about her job history to really tell you about this. She there in Lufkin, there's a community college called Angelina College, and they basically are most people probably know what a community college, junior college is, but they have a nursing program there, and it's a 2-year program, and she went through that program. That's how she got in. She couldn't have got into a regular college without a high school diploma, but you can with a junior college. And she got her LVN, which is the lowest ranking of nursing in Texas.
Right.
And her first job out of college was with Memorial Hospital here in Lufkin. And don't know what happened there. She was there for 2 months, and she left. And I have no idea why. And matter of fact, the police didn't know either, because I think there was something happened to her records. I'm not sure. But nobody knew why she left Memorial. But she went from Memorial to Woodland Heights Hospital in Lufkin. And this is where the problems really come in at. She was there for about a month and a half. She got fired, and she was fired for stealing Demerol and for giving patients inject pain medication who didn't need it.
Jesus.
Yeah, that should have been a huge flag right there.
Yeah. Well, so she was fired at that time?
She was fired. As a matter of fact,
so how does she?
When she hired on to DaVita, she'd been fired from 5 places, 5 nursing jobs, in a year and a half.
Now, why don't these? You would think the healthcare industry would at least be able to pass that information on to another business. I mean, there would be no reason for them not to. It would think it would be in their best interest.
Except for federal law says they can't.
Oh, okay. Federal law says
they cannot.
Disclose
the only by federal law, the only thing they can tell another employer is if they would hire those people back or not.
And?
That's it.
Was she recommended each? How does she get 5 more jobs?
She has 5 no rehires on her record when DaVita hired her, and I believe that's a huge problem. But that's not even the biggest one. That's not even the biggest one in this mess. But Woodland Heights contacted the Texas Board of Nursing about her being fired, about her stealing the Demerol, which she confessed to. Giving shots to patients who didn't need it, she confessed to all this.
That's even worse.
Yeah. Here's the problem with this. It doesn't go on her record until the Texas Board of Nursing investigates these charges.
And what would compel them to do that?
Well, when they get around to it. When they eventually ended up investigating the charges against her from Woodland Heights, she had just been fired from DaVita for killing patients.
Jesus. Now, with DaVita, I mean, with lawsuits, I mean, everybody's afraid of a lawsuit in America.
Yep.
I mean, including these guys. They don't have a screening policy that can kind of put 2 and 2 together. Sure, there's no information to say they did this. But if you're gone and you only lasted a few months, you're either a lousy employee or they have to get an explanation from the employee why they left. Or, I mean, wouldn't it be easy to put 2 and 2 together? How desperate is DaVita?
Well, Texas medical facilities in Texas are desperate for nurses. They need them desperately. It's one of the huge positions that really is in demand. But, and I have no evidence of this, mind you, none, what I'm about to say. But I know she did this before. After Saenz was arrested, after the grand jury indicted her and she was charged, she was let out on bail. But one of the stipulations of her bail is she could not be employed at any health care facility.
Right.
And she went and got a job at a health care facility, a children's home. And this is how she did it. She put on her application that she was a nurse, but she's been working for a roofing company. And she gave them a phone number to check her reference to. As it happens, that phone number was her husband's cell phone number.
God.
So I don't know what she did with DaVita, but she did do that.
Now let's go backwards a little bit because we haven't even talked about the crimes itself. She hasn't. Like I said, we've just talked about her getting hired. Now, at the Woodland Hospital and the other health facility that she worked at, in her position as the LVN, that's her nurse status,
right.
What did her duties entail?
At DaVita, she was mostly a care technician, care person. They took care of patients. They checked their vitals. They hooked them up to the dialysis. They kept checking them and all this throughout the dialysis process. DaVita had 3 tiers of employees who took care of patients. The RNs, which are registered nurses, and they're higher than LVNs. They usually were the med nurses or the supervisors over this. Then they had the LVNs. Then they had PCTs, patient care technicians. And the patient care technicians were not nurses, but they could do everything the LVNs could do except give shots. And for the most part, as a patient care technician, she just took care of patients. Now, there's times, of course, people's on leave, sick, things like that. She was the med nurse. That meant She gave the meds. That's all she did. And that's all she wanted to do, because she did not want to take care of patients. She hated it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, she hated taking care of patients.
Now, we've also kind of jumped over this a little bit. What is the sort of general, number one, let's give it for the audience that's kind of pining for what does this person look like? You can, just in a second, describe, her height, 5'4", about 170, you said, but tell us a little bit about her appearance and how she comes across. But tell us to the extent, what would people characterize her most by? What did she turn into? What kind of person, overall sort of disposition? What kind of person was she? Likable? What did she look like first? And what was her disposition?
At the time of trial, she was short and really heavy. She bad acne. I wouldn't say that she was attractive. I wouldn't say she's attractive, no. During the trial, and leading up to the trial and during the trial, she was really happy. And I think I even described this, and it wasn't just me, because other people saw this too, but she really, really enjoyed the attention. Right. She just seemed to relish the attention. Even the pre-trial meetings and things like that, when they went in before the judge and everything to get things hashed out, she just seemed to have a good time.
She was the center of attention.
Yeah, she was enjoying herself. She really was. I spoke to every one of the jurors. As a matter of fact, I sat down with all 12 jurors at one time, and we talked for about 8 hours over wine and pizza about everything involved with the trial. And one of the things the prosecutor worried about going in was nobody knows what a serial killer looks like. But if you was going to take a picture and say, this is a serial killer, you wouldn't take her picture.
Right.
She's a mother of 2, she's married. She doesn't look like a serial killer. Of course, nobody knows what one looks like. But during the trial, and the prosecutor was worried about that, but during the trial, afterwards, the jurors told me they didn't know what a serial killer looked like, but watching her, they knew what one acted like.
Yeah, the psychopathic tendencies.
Yes,
certainly.
Definitely. She, during the trial, she would taunt the families of the victims.
Yeah.
She would turn and smile at them, just. And they were about to bust a gut. They really were.
Now let's just go back, because we got to make sure that people understand the gravity of this crime and how she was able to do this at all. And before reading your book, I had no idea really the importance and significance of bleach in her work and in the hospital in general, and I had no idea what they actually would use, why she would have access to it, so I thought it odd. So tell us a little bit more, and I don't really know the dialysis process. I may have an inclination, but tell us about the dialysis center in terms of what exactly patients are in there for. And before we start, too, one thing you mentioned, too, that this is a very, very unique crime in that there have been people in the hospital setting that have killed patients, but for the vast majority, they've been people that were going to die anyway, and they were like an avenging angel or putting people out of their misery just a little bit before. So completely different than this person. So tell us first what the significance is of bleach and why she had access to it before we get into the actual crime.
Right. Bleach is predominant in all dialysis centers, not just DaVita. They use it. They use it to clean blood, wipe the seats, but they also use it to wash out the machines, rinse out the machines, because blood goes in through there. So it's prevalent in there. When you walk into the center, you can get a little tinge of it, the smell of bleach, because that's how prevalent it is in there. But they use it to clean the tables. They use it to clean the chairs. They use bleach solution. Now, don't get me wrong, not pure bleach. They're supposed to pour the bleach into a container and mix it with water and just wipe the seats off and things like that.
Right.
And dialysis, and when I started this process, I didn't know anything about dialysis either, and I had to go through 3 years of education on dialysis and everything just to learn it. But the blood, the kidneys are very important for a lot of reasons. But one of the main reasons is it filters everything filters impurities out of the blood and everything. And when people have kidney disease and their kidneys stop functioning, they have to have dialysis, which means usually they go in for 3 or 4 hours a day, 3 days a week. And all their blood is taken out of their body through a filtering system, through a machine, and then it's put back in. Now, it's not all taken out at once, mind you. Each patient has a different flow rate that it goes out and it comes back in. But it basically cleans their kidney, the blood. And without it, the patients die.
Right.
And it's the kidneys do a lot of different things, but I can't go into everything right now as they do. No.
Now, it becomes important a little bit later, and we'll get back to this. But was there any reason to use the bleach, to have the bleach in, and other than what you just said the instructions were, to dilute it, to use it as a solution, to clean? It's involved in the dialysis machine itself, and I think the instrument cleaning as well, right, if I'm not correct. But the thing is, was there any reason, because this becomes important later, was there any reason for, say, Kimberly Clark or any other LVN or anyone to be measuring out the bleach for any reason in any form, but measuring actually, I need this much for this? Was there any real reason to be measuring bleach?
No, there wasn't. What happens is the PCTs come in the morning, and each dialysis station has 2 little small pails. And in the morning, the PCTs measure it out. And it's so much per, each pail has a different measurement. So one has 10 millimeters of bleach to 100 millimeters, and the other one has 100 millimeters to 1,000. And one of the little pails, they use it just to wipe the seats off after the patients get out. Patients leave. And the other one, they use it if blood is spilt, to wipe up the blood. But actually being at the dialysis station, there's no need for anybody to be mixing bleach there. It's all done beforehand. And they have enough that they don't run out.
Okay.
And that was important.
Okay, so set the scene for this very dastardly few weeks, and that she carried out this evil plot. Tell us if there was anything that, in retrospect, that she had been going through that would, like, equivalent of as a homicide detective, something that would be considered a trigger. Any, I guess, outside circumstances or something that would affect her, possibly, we'll say, that nothing can account for this, but anything that might have contributed to it, let's put it that way. And then tell us about what starts to happen and that few weeks of how on earth she had access to these patients and this death toll and injury toll was racking up. Talk to us about our audience about that.
Yeah, she had spent some time, a little bit of time, in a mental institution for severe depression. Okay. As a matter of fact, she beat her husband up twice. He took out 2 restraining orders against her. She was just really, really miserable. But I would like to say all this started at DaVita, but I really don't think it did. I think this is just a culmination. I think this started at Woodland Heights.
Why is that?
Because she was giving shots to patients for medicine who didn't need it.
Right.
And I think this just kind of built up. That's my personal
wouldn't that have
opinion.
Wouldn't that have been for a completely different reason, though? I mean, the thing that it might be important that she wanted to get attention, but the other one was sort of, I want to give you a shot of medicine for a feel-good effect. She was Dr. Feelgood, wasn't she? Administering drugs that people really needed? Maybe,
but that's the first time I know that she stepped out of bounds as a nurse.
Right.
That's what I mean. And later, she really steps out of bounds. I mean, when you start killing patients, you can't get any further out of bounds than that. But
you said she didn't want to be the care. She didn't want to be the lowly care worker. But what was her relationship?
She was her relationship.
Okay, but what was her relationship with the patients? Some people depicted her as a friendly, likable person, but what was her relationship with the actual patients?
Most of the patients she got along real well with. The employees, she didn't.
She didn't?
No, she did not. She was constantly complaining. Matter of fact, several of them thought she was just going to quit. She didn't like the job. She was constantly complaining. She just wanted to be a med nurse. And I think that had a lot to do with her addiction to pain medication.
Just wanted to have access to drugs herself. Is that it?
Right.
And that would be the only way to that'd be the only way to really skim some meds for herself.
Right.
Now,
this everything, 2 witnesses saw her do this, saw her inject patients with bleach on April 28th.
Right.
But that's not really where this story starts. This story starts on April the 1st. It is, and to explain this, I need to tell the audience that the odds of someone dying while on a dialysis machine is 1 in 700,000.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen very often. They're in a medical facility. They have nurses there. They have doctors there. They They constantly monitor the vitals. They they check their vitals before they even start dialysis. They check several times during and they check it afterwards. Dialysis patients die because they're old and they're sick, for the most part, some of them. But they usually don't do it while they undergoing the dialysis process. And like I said, the odds of dying on the machine is 1 in 700,000. On April the 1st, 2008, 2 patients died on the machine in dialysis and DaVita Lufkin, 5 minutes apart. And you can't even calculate those odds.
So what was the hospitals and their staff's response to this unlikely event? Was there an investigation? What was their conclusion? What did they do?
They knew something was wrong, but they didn't know what. So they sent in a team of basically what they call monitors, but they're investigators. They were led by an RN who was the regional director to come in, and they were going to look at everything involved in the dialysis process there. And they were there at the facility on April the 2nd, 2008. That morning, April 2nd, they were there. And that date is probably the biggest. Kimberly Saenz did something on that morning. It was probably the biggest thing that got her convicted. But I'll go back to that if we have time. But
okay, we'll leave that. Okay.
Okay. They started looking at everything, and they couldn't find anything. They knew something was wrong, but they couldn't find it. They looked at everything, the water, the procedures, everything except employees. And nobody believed that an employee would be doing this. And as a matter of fact, several patients, 3 patients ended up dying in between that date and April 28th. There was going to be 4 others that was going to suffer serious injuries and stuff. But on April 22nd, April 28th, the morning of April 28th, Kimberly Saenz was supposed to be the med nurse that morning. And one of the techs called in sick, and they had to call somebody in, but the only thing they could find was an RN. So they brought an RN in, and the RN became the med nurse because that's what RNs do, and they shifted Kimberly Saenz to patient care. And she threw fit. She went out, started smoking. They literally had to go out and talk her into coming back to work. And in some ways that may have been a huge mistake. But she came back into work, and a little later on, 2 patients. And let me explain this. Let me explain this. How DaVita operated. DaVita operated in teams. 1 PCT or 1 LVN took care of 4 patients. And they worked in teams, and when one went on break, the other one watched the other's patients for him.
Okay.
And that morning, Kimberly Saenz was working with a PCT by the name of Angie Rodriguez, which is not important, but Angie went on break. And when she did, 2 of Kimberly Saenz patients saw her go over to Angie Rodriguez's patients and inject them with bleach. And it literally scared the 2 patients to death. Literally. They didn't know what to do. They had just seen her do it. They knew she did it. And this was their nurse. This wasn't the other people's nurse. This was their nurse. So what they did, they finally... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask, what did they do?
They called somebody over and told them what they saw. And they really didn't believe her. But they went to the person who had came in to investigate everything. And they told her what they'd saw. But not only did they tell her what they'd saw, they told her things like what Kimberly Saenz had done with the syringes when she got through with them. She had dropped them in 2 different sharps containers right there by the station. And they told them exactly which sharp containers she'd dropped them in. So, Amy Clinton, who was the one conducting all this going on, she had 2 really, really scared patients. And they had to finish the dialysis with them. You know, once it starts, you can't stop. Right. So she figured the best thing to do to diffuse everything for the moment was tell Kimberly Saenz to go home. And Saenz didn't like it, but she went ahead and went home. And they were able to go ahead and get the patients, get the dialysis complete. And the 2 patients that they saw her inject had adverse conditions, and they had to take care of them. Yeah, and they had to take care of them. Fortunately,
how bad was their injuries, and what did they do? Like, was there anything they could do to, if they thought it was bleach, what was their reaction in terms of medically?
Medically, they didn't know what to do. They didn't have a clue. And at that point, they still wasn't really sure if they wanted to believe the patients.
I see.
You know what I'm saying? Because this just sounded so far-fetched. It's never happened, ever, and it just sounded so far-fetched. And after a time, the 2 patients that was supposedly injected got better. And, you know, she killed 5 patients. Well, I think she killed 19, but, you know, she was charged with killing 5. But there were 5 others who were injected that didn't die, and probably several others that they just don't know about. But it all depends on how much bleach they got, and also what condition they're in. That's a guesswork too, because nobody really knows that, because nobody had ever studied the effects of bleach, really.
What was the reaction by the hospital itself, and how did they conduct any kind of investigation at all? What did they do after this?
Well, the first thing they did, they sent her home, and they called the director of the facility there, and they opened up the 2 sharps containers. And, you know, they have these little measuring sticks, I guess like you measure, you check the spa and stuff, and they opened these sharps containers up, and they looked at the syringes that were on top, and they checked them for bleach, and they found some that tested positive for bleach.
Okay.
And at that point, they were just at a loss. And they probably, I don't really know what went on there. I'm sure DaVita Division, Fortune 500 company, I guarantee you, I don't know it, but I guarantee you, they got their attorneys on the line, you know, and they got their hires up, and they started trying to see what they were going to do about this. And eventually, they got around to calling the police. There was about a 4-hour delay, though, before they called the police.
Okay.
And
so now here's... So they believe that the bleach has been confirmed. The story seems plausible. They have these, you know, they've had some fatalities, and these people were injured. They are a Fortune 500 company. They would like to diminish how many deaths or injuries can be attributed to their nurse.
Yeah.
But still, they have to contact the police. They know that. How did police proceed, and how long is it before they arrest Kimberly Clark?
The police got out there, I think it was about 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And the one they gave this to, mind you, when the police got it, all they knew was there's possible tampering with medicine or something. They had no idea what was going on. And they sent out the detective sergeant over, I'm not going to say homicide, over the detectives, because Lufkin doesn't have specialized detectives.
Right.
All the detectives do everything. But they sent the detective sergeant out. And he didn't want to go by himself. So he started going around looking for somebody to take with him. And he really couldn't find anybody. And finally he found the corporal over the detectives who had just got back from SWAT training. And he was even still in his SWAT gear. So they drive out to DaVita. They don't have a clue what's going on. And they start hearing this story. And they didn't believe the witnesses either. Really didn't. Matter of fact, very few people are going to believe these witnesses at first.
Why do you think that was? What was the reason for the police not believing these people?
The police seldom believe witnesses. Seldom. You can have a white man in the middle of Times Square shooting people, and you have 100 witnesses, and you're going to have 90 different descriptions.
Right. Mm-hmm.
90 different people may tell you a different race. So, you, as a policeman, you learn to be really leery about what witnesses tell you. And besides that, it was just far-fetched. It just seemed really far-fetched.
Well, wasn't there the confirmation from the hospital already, or did they not divulge that information that the syringes tested for bleach, which again, as we've established, there'd be no reason for a bleach to be in any syringe, would there be?
None whatsoever. But that was a couple of DaVita employees who tested the syringes. That wasn't a lab.
Right.
And you can't, as a investigator, you can't just say the employees are right.
Okay, well then, they couldn't do any independent testing because that was
not right
probably
then.
Too late to do.
Yeah, not right then. They could do it, but they could send it to labs, but they couldn't do it right then. This is going to take time. And
now,
initially, they just didn't believe it. But go ahead.
Now, did they have the wherewithal or initiative to go and interview Kimberly Clark Saenz and talk to her? And if they do, what's the conditions that in which she does speak to them? Does she get an attorney? How does she tell us about this?
Initially, she did not get an attorney. This happened on the 28th. The police actually came out to DaVita probably around 4 or 5 on the 28th. And they didn't get through there with all the crime scene stuff and everything and interviewing people at DaVita until about 10 or 11 at night. And the next morning, both detectives, Corporal Shirley and Sergeant Abbott, went out to Saenz home and got her and brought her in just to talk to her. And they asked her, do you want to drive your car or do you want to go with us? And she told them she would go with us, but just give her a second to make a couple of calls. And they went out and waited for her. And Sergeant Abbott later told me that was one of the worst decisions he made because she was in there too long. But she came out, got in the car, and they took her to the Lufkin Police Department. They started talking to her. And they probably talked to her about 25 minutes. And they showed the tape in court. and you could just see it. All of a sudden, she became drunk. She couldn't speak coherently. She couldn't think. She was drunk. It was just, they're sitting there, and it was just like they just picked up a drunk person. And the only thing they could figure that when they went out to wait in the car, she took something. And it took time to kick in.
Sure.
And they eventually, after about 10 minutes of this, and her cell phone would ring. And she didn't even know how to answer their cell phone. She was just sitting there. And finally they had to say, we got to end the interview. And that was the last chance they got to talk to her, because she did lawyer up then. But they got some good stuff in that first 25 minutes, though.
Yeah, it is interesting how they utilize that. So,
yeah.
And pretty well, there are no other. Well, obviously, there's no other suspects because, again, a little bit of her defense is that maybe DaVita is framing her, but of course, nobody could ever find any evidence of anything like that. In terms of, there's a bunch of deaths at this hospital, but then what's the most, horrifying is that without those two, again, witnesses that no one believes, you wouldn't have this crime spree ending anytime soon, would you?
No,
I mean, when
no.
Yeah, that's.
If they hadn't saw it that morning, there's no telling how long this would have went on. And the problem was, and one of the huge problems, and how she got away with it for so long, is she was doing this during the breaks, the lunches and the breaks and things like that, when she was there with other people's patients.
But you say the incredible odds, 1 in 700,000 that somebody can die from the process, and you have 2 people, and then you have 3 people, you have 5 people.
Mm-hmm.
How do fellow employees explain that? I mean, again, I find that disturbing.
Yeah, they were at a loss. They really were. They didn't know what was going on. They really didn't. I was going to tell you, and I know you're running out of time here, and I was going to tell you about this April 2nd deal.
Okay.
The April 1st, those 2 patients died, and and the investigators were there the morning of April 2nd. But at 4:30 in the morning, right before she went to work, Kimberly Saenz on April 2nd got on her computer and ran a search. Can bleach be detected in dialysis lines?
Interesting.
And on April 2nd, nobody knew anything about bleach. Nothing. And she knew these investigators were coming, and she was checking online to see if they could actually detect bleach in dialysis lines, see how much trouble she was in.
Can they detect bleach?
Actually, they could not up until this point. They could not. Matter of fact, there was no lab in the country capable of testing that equipment and saying it was bleach in it. Not a single one. They finally found the FDA, who said they would try, and they were able to. But, yeah.
So this case in particular brought that change?
Yeah, the FDA was able to discover that bleach was in the dialysis lines.
Okay. Now, when is it and under what circumstances is she finally, and what's the date that she's arrested, and what's she charged with? I found this interesting. I'm not familiar with this sort of cluster murder charge. So tell us when she was and under what circumstances she was charged for murder. And
she was first arrested on May 9, 2008. And she was arrested on two charges of aggravated assault. And aggravated assault was a deadly weapon, bleach. They were charging her for those two patients that she injected with bleach on the morning of the 28th. The DA here found out that it's really, really difficult to convict medical people in court. Really difficult. Matter of fact, less than 50% are convicted by trial.
Wow.
The other over 50% get off. Most of the medical professionals that are convicted are done through confessions.
Okay.
So what they wanted to do on May 9th, they wanted to charge her with these two aggravated assaults, get her in, and try to get a confession. Because at that point, they knew she committed murders. But they didn't know, at that point, they didn't know how or if they would ever convict her of them. So they were trying to get a confession.
Yeah, but by this time, by this time, unless she has an idiot for an attorney, he knows or she knows that. So tell us what the response is to that. I think that wouldn't work.
No, it didn't. She had an attorney and it didn't work. But that's the best way to get medical professionals. You can work out a deal and say, hey, we'll do this if you'll just come out and confess to these. And a lot of times it works. And sometimes it doesn't. In her case, it doesn't. And I spent a lot of time in the book on the trial. And I did it for a couple of reasons. One, because it's so difficult to convict medical people with a trial.
Right.
And number two, nobody in this world has ever been put in trial for killing someone with bleach.
And also, you've got a woman serial killer, and you've got a death penalty state that every state, whether they like the death penalty or not,
Texas does.
It doesn't really put women to death. It's hesitant to put women to death.
Yes, Texas is one of those too. Texas will execute men. Don't get me wrong. They execute a bunch of men, but they don't execute a lot of women.
What I was going to ask is, because we won't. I love the aspect of the trial because, like you say, it's in a lot of cases, from reading the back description of the book, you already know what the conclusion was. So to go through a trial is pretty tedious for a lot of people, and I can understand that too, because a lot of true crime fans are very knowledgeable about the law process. They don't want to go back over it again so much. They want a lot of movement in the trial. Trial in a lot of people's minds really slows down a story, but not in this particular case. And you start off with it. And again, we're not going to give the conclusion away because the trial is a very wild ride and very interesting characters arise. She has a really good lawyer. Of course, when you pay a lot of money and you try to get the best, you get somebody that straddles that line between ethics, I think. I think that's safe to say as a homicide detective.
He didn't straddle the line. He didn't straddle the line. He didn't straddle the line. He went well over it.
Yeah.
It's
that's always something.
Yeah. It's not often that a judge calls you a liar and dishonest in court.
Yeah, you've crossed some line anyway. Absolutely. Yeah. Now, we won't give this away because you really have access because, like you say, you went to the trial, and it was what I thought interesting was, they moved, the judge realized that, okay, we have a smaller courtroom and then we have a bigger one. We're likely going to need this big one because it has international press, it has the media's interest, and everybody wants to get into this thing, and you really paint that picture too, the anticipation.
That made me mad, too. That made me mad.
Why is that?
Well, during voir dire and everything, I knew that I was going to be pressed for time to get interviews and everything. So I was going to do some pre-writing. And one of the things I was going to do was describe the courtroom and all that.
Oh, okay.
And while voir dire was going on, I was sitting there in my typewriter describing the courtroom and everything. And right there at the end, the judge said, I'm thinking about moving the trial from this courtroom to the other one. He said, does anybody have any problems with that? And, he was talking to the attorneys. But I wanted to raise my hand and say, yeah. I didn't, but I wanted to.
Yeah, I found it interesting, too, because I've never really seen any photos, and I've never been in any courtroom myself where you describe the courtroom as kind of tattered and old seats. So, it's...
And it stunk. Whew.
Yeah, you're saying it smelled like urine.
Yeah, it did. They bring those prisoners in all at one time, and they sit there in these seats. And some of them hadn't ever had a bath, I don't think.
Wow.
But they bring them in for jail call. They'll bring 50 of them in at once and set them in there. And I think some of them pees on it and everything. But God, that place stunk.
God. Yeah, that's. I'm not familiar with, a trial where you'll have anybody but the defendant in the actual courtroom itself. I've seen other. I've seen adjournments, and I've seen, like for remand. But so that was very different for me to see the state and disorder of the courtroom itself. But
at
you really
times,
capture
that was standing room only.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of a stir, and again, always baffling to me how some people, based on their hunches, I guess, or that thinking she's innocent, but based on what, I have no godly idea. But it was really a conversation at the water cooler in this little place, wasn't it, in Lufkin?
Yeah. Oh man, this was something. The funny thing is, because of the news reporting, a lot of people thought she was going to get off. They thought she was guilty, but they thought she was going to get off. And
we won't give it away. We won't give it away because the thing is that anything could happen in this because she was smart enough. It seems that as much as the 25-minute interview was a mistake, any kind of interview without an attorney is a mistake.
Yeah.
But she is a pretty cunning kind of person. Again, I think it's interesting. The psychopath is cunning, but then it seems that the ego, the narcissism, takes over, and they get foolish.
Exactly.
It's interesting.
And I think the morning of the 28th, she was just so upset because she wasn't a med nurse. And there were some things that happened to her private life, too, right before that. But I think she was just so upset that she got careless. Yeah,
well, obviously, yeah.
And,
well, thank God she got careless.
Yeah, and everything those two witnesses said proved to be true.
You know what I found odd is that there wasn't more disdain for DaVita Corporation itself, and that, well, not the corporation, but that franchise in itself, that clinic.
They were wrong on some things. There were some things that they were not doing well, and I tried to say that, but getting information out of them too is pretty hard.
Wow, of course.
You don't you don't just go up and ask them questions because their employees wouldn't even allow. Their employees had attorneys.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's when people are dying, that's a huge thing, and when it's the responsibility of a nurse, I mean, my God, that could be bad for business.
Yeah.
No, it's very bad. I mean, I'm being facetious.
Yes, it is.
Bad.
I'll say this for DaVita, though. They had problems. They did, but they corrected them. And they got their butts sued off, too.
Well, that'll correct.
And they paid those.
Excuse me. Well, the thing is that there's a lot more book. We've gone through this basic story, but there's so much more to this book.
Yes.
And like a lot of reviewers have said of your book too, it's really, because I guess you're a fictional writer, it really helps. But also, I think the main thing of this is that you really don't get overburdened with details that don't mean as much. So for seasoned readers, they love a great story without reiterating some of the things that, maybe a first-time true crime reader might be reading, we'll say. And so I applaud you in keeping the reader, myself and any reader, basically on the edge of his seat here. It moves very, very quickly, very exciting story. And I love when a trial is not a foregone conclusion. And it's very, very interesting trial. Like you say, it's a tough uphill battle.
Yeah. I tell you what, one of the attorneys told me after the trial. I sit down and talk to all of them, but one of them, I don't really want to say which one, but he told me that in murder cases, usually you have one little point that you have problems with. Mm-hmm. The others are just really open and shut. But you usually have one little problem that you have problems with. And this one, they had problems with everything. Every point they had to fight for.
Before we go, I wanted to also talk about, just briefly, and just explain how this happens in Texas, is that the jury had to decide on a murder charge, but it was 5 murders in one. I have never heard of this sort of cluster murder charge, which seems, again, to have complicated the case for the jury and hence for the prosecution and the community. So tell us what Texas law is that you are able to do this, and why would you do this, and you have to do this, or what is this?
Under Texas law, there's 2 types of murder. There's murder, and then there's capital murder. And capital murder is usually best defined by murdering someone in the commission of a felony. If you go into a store to rob somebody and you shoot and kill a clerk, that's capital murder. If you kill a fireman or a policeman in a line of duty, that's capital murder. There's a few other things. If you kill a kid under 10, it's capital murder. But if you kill a number of people over a time period using the same method, that's also capital murder. So instead of saying she killed 5 people, they lumped all those 5 together into one charge of capital murder. And basically all the jury had to do was say she's guilty of at least 2 of them. If she's guilty of at least 2 of them, the jury believes jury convicted her of all 5. But the charge sheet, they said if you killed at least 2 of them, then you're guilty of this capital murder, because it has to be 2 or more. So that's why they put them all in, to get capital murder out of it, so they could get the death penalty.
I see,
just murder, just murder doesn't have the death penalty.
Yeah, those requirements of the 2 murders, and then you get a 5 was interesting to me. It was news to me. I hadn't heard of that kind of deal before, and I know that would complicate things for the jury, so further complicating this case. And of course, it also complicated it by their ploy to have her confess did not work, and so obviously it was a setback for the prosecution. So I want to thank you very much, John, for coming on and talking about this. How could people contact you if they're interested? Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, how can people contact you?
It's www.johnfoxjohnhome.com. johnfoxjohnhome.com. And, of course, I'm on Facebook at john.foxjohn, facebook.com or whatever that is. But just John Fox John, if they good.
I apologize for that. We've had some kind of disconnection with John. I want to thank our audience for tuning in and listening to John Fox John
speaking about his book, Killer Nurse. Good night.